Tisha B'Av is obviously a day of mourning. It is one of the days of mourning in our Jewish calendar. We are mourning the loss of our temple, the loss of the centrality of the Jewish people. And it's a uniquely painful time. And I think something that has come up in the past two sessions is in some ways the fact that it's an invitation for us in a unique way to really bring our grief to the table. I want to invite everyone here to, in the chat, we've all been in some way in a state of grief now for almost 2 years. And that grief might be for a specific person, and maybe for, a change from our regular daily lives, a change from the way we engage with community and family. And so I want to ask that in the chat, folks, to please note or share with us some societal, communal, or even personal change that you experienced as a result of COVID that you've been mourning, that you feel like we have lost and you are mourning for. So again, in the chat, and I'll just do some reading out loud as folks put their thoughts into the chat. What societal, communal, personal changes did you experience as a result of COVID that you feel that was a loss for you, that you've been mourning? And so I'm going to give everyone about 2-3 minutes to start thinking and writing. I'm seeing loss of easy, casual social interaction, the limited contact with my granddaughter. Absolutely, I have small children, and the lack of time with grandparents has been brutal. The loss of Shabbos and Yom Tov meals with friends, loss of connection to people, communities, gathering together in synagogue, not seeing my friends so often, singing, yes. Not being in the classroom with my students, yes. Shabbos dinner with friends, singing with meals, I'm seeing snapping, yes. Allison lost both her parents in the month of Adar, not from COVID, but I lost community from the mourning process, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. My daughter was abruptly sent home from a semester-long Israel program, right? How many folks who were supposed to go into transitional moments in their lives, whether a year in Israel, a year in college, even at their first year in high school, your first graders, right? Of course, communal singing, my children's loss of their school communities. I'll share folks who had little children who normally would have gotten a chance to be around so many people. All of a sudden their children are afraid of people. They don't know what it means to be around other people. Loss of ability to mourn loss of loved ones. Absolutely. Thank you. Not being hugged for over a year. Not being able to comfort my father when he was in Shiva, not being able to attend funerals or Shiva of other people. Sense that modern society, technology we would all be okay. That's a nice positive outlook, I think. Absolutely. We saw just as much on the other side. Missing our grandson's entire toddlerhood. Yes. Yeah. Not being able to visit my mother before she died. The missing public mourning. It's so interesting to hear, right? The loss of feeling comforted and the loss of being able to comfort. As people are continuing to write, I'm so grateful for folks to put this in there. We're going to transition in a second. I'm going to hand it over to Tzvi, but I just want to name that we're sort of in this very, very interesting transitional moment, which is that many of us are being vaccinated, different cities for different countries even. There's a feeling of sort of we're coming out, but not yet out of this crazy experience. And we're going to see that is something that the rabbis themselves had to grapple with. So with that, how to move past this pivotal moment in our history. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tzvi, who's going to help continue that thread in framing the text.
Okay. Yeah, it's very powerful. The sense of lost moments and the sense of how things that were very central to our lives were taken away from us. And that transitions well. The sages, after the destruction of the temple, had to struggle with this question of how to manage loss. And it's hard, it's sometimes hard for us 2,000 years later, not having a temple. This loss is very theoretical in some ways. Our big struggle is to try to connect and feel a sense of loss. But if we could project backwards in time, imagine speaking to a Jewish community where they, at least many Jews, lost the central or a central element of their sense of being close to God, accessing God, the national relationship with God, the sort of the very center of the nation, an attachment to holiness, all taken away without any clear sense of when it would return. And the question is how to respond to that. What's the religiously and nationally and even ethically appropriate response to that type of loss? And you can see in the text that you're about to look at, there's a real struggle there. And I urge you, when you look at this text, not to immediately assume that Rabbi Yoshua, who's the rabbinic voice, and ultimately that's the direction the Jewish people go in, but try to project back to that moment where this is a live machloket, this is a live debate about where are the Jewish people in the face of this loss and how should they relate to this loss. What's the right way to relate to this loss, or the best way to relate to this loss, or most appropriate way? So that's what this text is looking at. There's also a second short text there about the relationship between mourning and rejoicing, which I think is also an interesting question that we're going to be grappling with, about how these two emotionally loaded experiences relate to one another in a certain way. So what we're going to do is we're going to invite you to break up into chavruta, study partners, to take about 20 minutes to look at these texts. There's some chavruta questions that have been attached as well, study questions, which you are free to use or free to ignore. And then we're going to come back and try to unpack some of this and then see how, or identify what wisdom we can take away in terms of applying it to this, in a way, very transitional or not transitional. I don't even know where we're at right now, but this sense of uncertainty of how we need to respond now in terms of taking a few steps forward. So, Amir, are we ready to divide people up? We're good to go? Okay, so Amira's given her thumbs up. Okay, so we're back. I think all my things are on now. Is that correct? I'm good? All right.
Yep.
So
I can see you.
Which is not generally a great bargain. I have a face for radio, as they say. But in any event.
No, the voice is the important thing, not the face.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So, it's a very powerful text. And again, I want to remind us of the context of this text, right? This is, maybe it's 50 years, maybe it's 60 years, maybe it's even 20 years after the destruction of the temple. And Rabbi Yoshua encounters this group of people who are engaged in intense mourning practices. It almost sounds like for them every day is Tisha B'Av, right? They are self-defined as those who mourn. That is their identity in the story. They're not named. They are the mourners of Zion. And I'm curious your thoughts. What do you imagine is the tension that's going on here? What would you say is the main issue that everyone is struggling with? And maybe if we can get just a few people who want to give a quick response, you can raise your hand. Abraham raised his hand. Go ahead.
Okay, this Abraham is Rina Cohen. Sorry to disappoint you.
No disappointment. Go ahead.
Okay. I hear and I read, and I am quite an educated person in Judaism, as I went all the way through my first degree at the University of Jerusalem and with Hebrew studies. So I listened to those, but I just want to tell you that all the rules and the regulations, for me as a human being, it does not go with your children. With your children, I'm going to say something to you that is horrible. But for me, if I have to go through mourning my children, I would rather poison myself.
Okay, but Rena, I'm asking you about, but the question is about the text though. I understand, but my question was, I'll reframe the question. What is the central tension that this text is dealing with? That's my question.
Okay, so I'll just answer this in one sentence and then I'll go. You see, I think that with this kind of thing, there is too much mourning. Too much, it's almost you start enjoying being depressed, inflicting pain on yourself.
Okay.
So do I like it that the first temple was destroyed? No, I wish they wouldn't have done it. But if it happened, I'll remember it with some thought, but not with ruining my life and everybody's around it. And some people do that.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
The idea is that this is like, it's depression, it's embracing sadness. What about embracing the joy in life? Fantastic. Asher, you wanted to share.
I think some people may have been afraid that if they gave up this passionate mourning, then the passionate cause of rebuilding the temple would be lost. That is, if it is possible to move on, and we're a couple thousand years later, and Rabbinic Judaism kind of filled the void for us, and some moved on to the point of saying there's no need for a third temple. And these people are saying, no, whoa, we have to live our lives with passion for rebuilding. And if we start eating meat, we're going to give up the passion.
All right, too much accommodation, and the next thing you know, you're no longer missing it anymore. You've replaced it, you've moved past it, and maybe the mourning is the only way to keep it alive. We'll take one more comment from Miriam.
I see this tension between not wanting to forget, the temple, which was the center of Avodah, but also and living a life that through life and through the joys of life is also Avodah, serving Hashem. So there's that tension between living a life in service and not forgetting.
Okay.
But by the excessive and stringent mourning, we're not living, we're not serving Hashem, we're not engaging in Avodah through life.
Beautifully said, Miriam, beautifully said. So now I'm going to ask my friend Rabba Shani Gross over there. We're right next to each other on my screen, Shani. It's like we're chavruta pals. My question for you is, which of these two positions you identify with more? Who do you see? Where are you in that story?
So it's interesting. I really appreciate the Perushin. I really appreciate this sort of intense, wanting to hold on, and yet I actually think Rabbi Yehoshua, to me, he's not disagreeing, right? He doesn't. At the end of the day, he's not disagreeing with the point. He never disagrees argues with what they're aiming for. But I actually think what he does is so subtle, and it's so it's so much more meaningful to me, in that there's a recognition both that of course we can't stay in a state of intense mourning forever, but also actually sometimes it's the little things. And I think that's so true when it comes to mourning, that it's actually the little things that will get you, even as time goes on. And he sort of does that in such subtle ways. And one of the ones that really sticks out to me is the makeup, actually, which is the idea that, right, every day it's like a ritual, in technically not a Jewish ritual, but just a daily ritual, right? I even think, like, beyond even makeup, but I imagine like the way you brush your teeth, right? The idea of like the way you brush your teeth, the way you put on a moisturizer, or the way you put on something, and to all of a sudden do it a different way, or leave a little thing out. And it's actually, I also think about it as like it's an act that's so meticulous for a lot of people when they're doing it. And so the small change is so subtle, but it can totally throw you off and it can throw off your whole day. And so in some sense, I find that type of mourning, it's less grandiose, but it is so much more true, I feel like, to the experience of what mourning over time is like, where, you know, it's the little things that actually matter.
So you like you like the adaptations, the small things that Gemara suggests that we do. You know, it's funny because when I read the text, they feel so deliberately small. And I'm very sensitive to your point, the idea that he says to them, we don't put out decrees that the community can't tolerate. Almost as if to say, you know what, on a certain level, you guys are right. The fact that we're going to move on and we're not going to define ourselves as full-time mourners, you guys are right. We're losing something. But it also seems to be, he's saying, it's our human limitation that we can't be fully in a place of mourning and fully in a place of, as Miriam said, also trying to serve God with joy, right? The fact that weddings are mentioned, right? We're going to keep getting married. We're going to have families. And this whole idea of beauty, it's interesting how many of these examples are related in this sense of family life, and the home is where we leave something unfinished, right? That family life, we're going to keep building towards the future. And this idea that we can't fully be caught in mourning and still really build toward the future. But I think there's an acknowledgement we're going to lose something by moving forward. We're going to lose our attachment, our passion. You know, it's almost like Rabbi Yeshua knows that 2,000 years later, Shani Gross is going to have trouble feeling sad for the temple. Right? And Shani Gross might even watch a Holocaust movie on Tisha B'Av, because a movie about the destruction of the temple is not going to tug at her in the way that a Holocaust film might.
Absolutely.
Let's see if anybody else out there has a comment or two, and then I want to ask a relationship between rejoicing and mourning. Anybody want to jump in? Jordan Goldberg. I know Jordan.
Hey, it's me. My question is, I suppose the difference for me, at least, would be watching a film about the temple's destruction would be incredibly mournful, as long as it was about the people that died due to the temple's destruction. I feel like the temple itself as an object doesn't really do it for me in the way that watching, it's about the people more than the physical place, I suppose.
It could, but in a way you might be making the case for the mourners of Zion, right?
Right,
You're not moved by the loss because the Jewish people moved on.
Yeah.
Right, successfully. We moved on.
Yeah.
And therefore, that might be an articulation of their point.
Yeah.
We're going to end up moving on, and we're not going to remember the Mikdash. Is that my good friend Karen Lovinger on there?
Yep. Hi, Tzvi. And
Hello.
hi, Benny. Can I?
No, you can't say hello to other people during this class.
Okay.
My goodness, Karen. My
Just
goodness.
kidding. What struck me the most was the plaster on the house and how you're supposed to have it near the front door. And you're building a house, you're still moving on with your life, and you're building a life. But every time you walk into that beautiful, wonderful house, you have a memory of something that's not there, that you just keep in your mind, the one little piece that's not there, so that you're always looking forward to it being there again, but you're not stifling, like ending your life.
I'm taking you to my unfinished part of my house. Can people see that?
Yep.
Yeah, unfortunately, I hate to admit, I barely notice it anymore.
Interesting.
Just as an example of where we go. I think that this question of, can we really be in two emotional places at the same time, is really the challenging issue here, and the risks we take about being in one as opposed to the other. You know, is too much mourning not possible because, as someone says, just too depressing and too sad? Or is it just a point that it'll prevent us from moving forward. We won't accomplish the other things we want to accomplish. Shani, what are your thoughts? How did you understand that text? That if you're not sad for the loss of the temple, you won't rejoice in its completion.
I think, it's interesting. This text I have a harder time with, and it's not the first time I've seen it. When I think about it as relating to a person, I can imagine if you know someone's story and you know someone who has gone through the pain and suffering, right? Their joy is that much richer once you know their history. I don't know if I mean, it's almost, to me, it's interesting because in some way it's almost like the antithesis to what Rabbi Yeshua, right? What I see as Rabbi Yeshua is saying, and I think there's some folks who said this in the chat, is like, you can't think of the third temple if you're still thinking about temple one, right? But here, it's almost like it's a step backwards, right? You first have to do that process of mourning before you can get to the simcha.
Yeah, I think also fundamentally, if you don't miss it, then you won't be happy when it comes back. Like, I almost see this as like a psychological fact. If you don't long for it, then when it arrives, nothing that'll be terribly exciting about it for you, right? That these two things that almost go hand in hand. It's like, if you're not challenged by being alone, then the joy that you'll have with being with your partner won't be the same. It isn't to say that being alone has to be terrible or awful or miserable, but I think there's this idea that if you don't feel that something is missing, then you won't feel that something is completed when you have it. But I think that this question of how we both live in sad acknowledgement of the past and yet still very much with positive, hopeful, happy sense of our present and future, this is a very powerful dilemma that I think the text is trying to work out or accommodate or think about. And maybe it's something that has a relevant message for us for right now.
Yeah, I agree. Barry, I see your hand. Do you wanna say something?
Yeah, I was just going to vocalize something I put in the chat and add a little bit to it, is that, I hear a lot of modern Jews express, I don't have a yearning for the return of the temple. I'm very satisfied with rabbinic Judaism and there's no need for the temple to come back. And so I think a lot of modern Jews, just as you were saying, the teacher, we're so far removed from that direct connection with Hashem that the temple represents, that we have no way of understanding what it is that we've lost. And so, how can we miss it? Right. So yes, of course, it's so much more easy to watch a Holocaust film and relate to that type of suffering because we have no concept. There's no way to relate to what that was. It's so far removed from our lives.
Look, I think people ask similar questions about, have we integrated Holocaust mourning enough in our contemporary observance of Judaism so that people won't be facing that same problem a couple hundred years from now? I don't relate to what what European Jewry and Eastern European Jewry was. So the loss doesn't speak to me in the way maybe it does for us who still get the privilege of hearing survivors and knowing survivors and having more recent family members. It's a challenge. But I also think the temple is not just about suffering, but I think the temple, at least in its classic form, is supposed to represent this ideal form of Jewish expression and Jewish living and national religious identity. And I think the mourners are very concerned, what is Jewish life going to look like without that national center, if that national center is not primary? Because remember, a synagogue communal focus works very well day to day and locally, but what about that national sense of connection? Center. Anyways, I think these are all important issues to think about in terms of how we balance these things out.
I just want to add, I see Estelle. I just want to add two quick things I saw in the chat, which was the concern of what it sounds like was folks imagining where Rabbi Yeshua might be coming from, the idea that either, right, if we let mourning continue in this way, this extreme form of mourning, maybe it's like the act of competitive mourning, where it's really not about the thing where we're feeling loss over, but rather just the act of almost outdoing each other, who can mourn the most. And the other thing I'm seeing was oh, where did it go? That it can become this was interesting. This was Sherry wrote, like, it can become a form of idolatry. This like overindulgence into mourning as this sort of just more form of idolatry. And I actually want to use that to segue us a little bit in sort of the bigger picture, because part of the reason why Tzvi and I came up with this class was we were talking about this transitional moment we're in now in terms of our present day and dealing with COVID, where, I live in a place in Berkeley, California. I like to call it, while Tzvi is in the Holy Land, I'm in the holier than thou land. But which I say with love. I love this place so much. But it's been interesting to see how folks we've hung on to the masks, even though almost this majority of the city is vaccinated. And sort of, we were talking about just the way in which, there are certain things in this period that I can't wait to get rid of and let go of. And there are also things where I'm feeling like, are we really going to let go of this so quickly? Aren't we going to learn a lesson? Aren't we going to keep this with us? And so I actually want to open that up to folks here as well. Are there things that, both you feel like it's necessary that we shed and leave behind from this moment? Again, as we hopefully, God willing, are really transitioning out of this hellish almost 2 years. And are there things that at the same time you feel like it would behoove us to bring with us, whether in small ways or bigger ways? I want to open that question up. And Tzvi, I'm also curious, while people are writing, what you're thinking in terms of how you relate. Are you a Rabbi Yehoshua? Are you a Mourners of Zion, of Late Zion?
In terms of COVID, it's interesting. First of all, there's some people out there who have benefited from being in this state, right? People who enjoy working from home, people perhaps who felt overwhelmed by social anxiety from, too much contact out there, people who, feel safer at home, people who feel their life has slowed down and allow them to do more internal work. But no, I'm one of those people who is yearning to get past and be done. And there is no doubt, and I don't want to take it with me, even though I think that there are things that we've learned in terms of who we are and how we function that are probably worth keeping with us, or remembering, or acknowledging. Even the most basic lesson of how frail we are. That the sense that technology and science can solve all problems, maybe we have to hold on to that sense that we are frail and far more dependent creatures than we ever wanted to admit. But let's hear some folks out there.
Yeah, well, I have my hand raised.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, Estelle, you get to go first because I called on you and then I walked right over.
Thank you. But I can't find the unmute button here. That's what's crazy.
Okay. You just
well, you are
we'll
unmuted. So.
Oh, I am unmuted. Okay, so I'm thinking, for me, I almost think of like a titration, like you're taking drops out of a bottle for your nose drops or something. Mm-hmm. And you have no way of predicting if you push too hard, more of it's going to come gushing out. And if you push too lightly, you're not going to get enough. So some things are totally unpredictable in our lives. And we may never know whether we have some unresolved grief, as it's called in my field. And so, and that is, I didn't work directly at the end with adolescents as a social worker, but that's the problem. If you've never had training in knowing what's too much. My mother's mother died in the summertime, And my sister and I sat down and figured out, we never met her, this other grandmother. And this was here in New York that she died. It was a terrible accident. And so my mother, as the summer would begin, would start getting really freaked out because it led to other things that messed up her life, and it messed up our lives. So it's a complicated thing. And I got into this weird conversation the other day, why some people say Tisha B'Av and why some people say Tisha B'Av. Is this a class issue? They don't know that there's the little apostrophe or whatever. It's just weird because I didn't want to think about certain things, and I was cleaning my apartment, and in my bedroom, I came across a little plastic bag that has some costume jewelry from my mother, and some of the beads started falling out. And I insisted on getting on my hands and knees and looking for these beads. So, there's some things you cannot totally know how you're going to feel until you feel it, because it may remind you of something that you thought you dealt with. And, of course, now you may deal with it differently. It may not have that fresh sting or something, but I think, and there's almost like a whole business of having these memorial services that become very rote. And that's very sad to me that some congregations just have these big, massive music things or whatever, and it doesn't get closer to your heart. It's like the little beads, looking at the two little beads on the floor. I still wanted to hang on to them and say, could somebody, put this on a thing for me? Could I learn how to do it or whatever? I'm probably never going to do it. So anyhow, that's what I wanted to say. And
Thank you.
You're very welcome for listening to this. So for my family, we just have an overload with the summer and Tisha B'Av and everything like that.
Yeah.
So it's, thank you all.
Sounds like it's, thank you. It sounds like it's, again, it's it's the little things that you find that you want to hang on to so much. And then you also want to avoid having things just become so commonplace and rote. I want to maybe we'll take two more comments. Allison and Shiffy.
So I'm thinking that maybe that the morning of Tisha B'Av and remembering the destruction and how awful it is more for us to realize that we can survive horrible things and still go on. That if we're still remembering, if we read Eicha and we hear about what happened, and then we can still go on after that. We're able to, we have to keep remembering terrible things in order to know that you can still have a life after. That's
beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Shiffy.
Yeah. To take it out of the personal context, right? Because Tisha B'Av really is not a personal mourning holiday. It is a communal mourning holiday. And you might not always feel that, and it's sometimes hard to feel that, but I feel really strongly that if we took it out of the calendar or we mitigated it, we'd really be at a loss. We need a place for it. And it is for the Holocaust. It is for the every communal aspect, right? In the same, but it comes as part of our entire calendar. I had a fabulous chavrusa with Rob and Asher Chaim, and this is something I say to my students all the time, which is, as an entirety, as a whole, the entire Jewish calendar, the entire year elevates us each year that we can, right? You enter into Purim and you have to be happy. Not easy, right? Really not easy. And then you have to work at it. And on Yom Kippur, you have to do that kind of self-reflection, that cheshbon hanefesh. And if you continue to work through the calendar, you can lead a deeply emotionally relevant and resonant life. And so that is how, to think about, if you're not feeling it emotionally, intellectually at least, this is such an important part of our calendar. And then Asher Chaim brought in that it's this 3 weeks down and 7 weeks up. Right, the 3 weeks of we're at the lowest point of the Jewish calendar, and then we rise towards our personal and hopefully communal redemptions. So 2 cents, that's it, done.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that also because in some way I think that works as Rabbi Yeshua, right? He's sort of like, let's make a practical way in which you can live this thing and be on for the ride, as opposed to sort of going hard and fast all at once with any one practice. Thank you so much, Tzvi. Do you want to take us home in our last 2 minutes?
Sure. I will try to sum up what we've heard. It's true that mourning itself is paradoxical. On the one hand, you're expressing loss and sadness and a sense of life is not what it's supposed to be, at least from your perspective. On the other hand, by mourning, you're affirming you're still here, right? You're still doing something active. You're affirming that not all is lost because I, the mourner, am still present. And I think that this struggle of how we express sadness for what we have lost, both as a genuine emotional expression, but also as a way of holding on, of not wanting to say this is gone, what has been taken is something important. And the mourning of Tisha B'Av is supposed to transition into a sense of hopefulness that it's going to be restored. And the mourners of Zion are basically challenging us, saying, if we don't remember and hold on to it, it'll never come back. Because we won't take the steps necessary to bring it back. Where the critique is, but if you live in that space of always aspiring for what you don't have, you will not live in grateful joy for the things that you do have. And that's the danger of all adaptations, including COVID adaptations, right? By adapting during COVID, some people think that we risk some of the old ways we build community by replacing it with Zoom or other forms of technology that we put in jeopardy by reducing the longing for what we used to have. On the other hand, if we didn't adapt, we would have had nothing. We would not have had any communal Torah, communal prayer, communal contact at all. So I don't know what the answer is.
And also, right, like days of learning like this, now we get to have them and hopefully continue to have them. And folks who have never been able to participate in person.
Some people are going to say, but I like the adaptation better. Like it's the temple is rebuilt tomorrow, but you're saying, but I like my shul in Berkeley way better than that temple in Jerusalem, right? I like the songs, I like the people.
Right.
And that's the risk. In Eicha, we finish up, I think deliberately, we go back to that second to last pasuk, right? Chadesh yameinu kekedem. Renew our days as of old. There's a beautiful paradox there. On the one hand, we want what we used to have. On the other hand, we realize it has to be renewed in some way. We want restoration, but we also want renewal all at the same time. We want to grow and move forward, but we want to stay anchored in what we have. We want to be able to, move on, but not move away. And I think that challenge is deeply present. I think it's going to be deeply present now as we think about how to transition. I don't think we want to forget where we've been for the last year and a half, either the positive or negative lessons that we've learned about the fragility of our lives and communities, but how much we really do need each other, and also about how maybe some of the ways we were doing things wasn't necessarily the best way and wasn't working for everybody. But I think we are still desperate for redemption and for Geulah from this period. So I want to bless all of us with moving forward with the real Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem, that we're going to return but also renew all at the same time.